They say humiliation burns longer than fire, and that day, in front of 50 coworkers and one very smug manager, I learned exactly how hot it could get. It happened on a Tuesday morning, the kind that already feels heavy before it starts. My name's Rachel Moore, and at the time, I was a mid-level analyst at Falcon Dynamics, a slick, fast-talking tech company where performance meant everything and mistakes meant blood. And the man who made sure we all remembered that? Ethan Shaw, my manager. He was the kind of boss who smiled too wide when he was winning and smirked even wider when someone else stumbled. Charismatic, confident, impossible to read, the kind of man who wore tailored suits and casual cruelty like matching accessories. For months, I'd been trying to prove myself under him. I worked late, skipped weekends, and double-checked everything I did. My reports were spotless, my numbers tight, my instincts sharp. I thought that if I just worked hard enough, he'd finally see me as more than the new girl he inherited from another department. Then came the email. A miscommunication, one small data oversight, one spreadsheet sent too early. The kind of mistake that could have been fixed in seconds. But instead, Ethan turned it into a spectacle. "Rachel," he said in that rehearsed, too calm voice during our Monday meeting, "you really sent this to the client?" Everyone looked up from their laptops. My stomach dropped. Yes, but I caught the error. I already sent a correction. He leaned back, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at his mouth. "Oh, I'm sure you did." After they noticed. A few people chuckled quietly. I froze. He could have let it go. He could have moved on. But he didn't. He kept talking, milking it, turning my tiny mistake into a company-wide comedy bit. For the rest of the meeting, he dropped lines like, "Let's double-check things before we pull a Rachel, and don't worry, we'll have Rachel proof it next time. She's got the experience." Laughter filled the room. My face burned. I wanted to disappear under the table. Afterward, I went to his office, still trembling. "That was unnecessary, Ethan." He didn't even look up from his screen. "Relax. It was a joke. Builds character." It humiliated me in front of everyone. He finally looked at me then, one eyebrow raised. "You made a mistake, Rachel. Learn to laugh about it, or this job will eat you alive." I left his office without another word, but something in me cracked. Not loud, not visible, just a hairline fracture deep enough to shift the way I saw him. From that day on, things changed. He started giving me impossible deadlines. Presentations that used to take a team of 3 were suddenly my responsibility. When I delivered good work, he took credit. When something went wrong, it was my name on the report. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, that I was just overly sensitive after the embarrassment. But the patterns were too precise to ignore. Ethan was grooming me to fail. The irony? I still respected him. Or maybe I wanted to. I told myself he was just pushing me to improve, that his cruelty was really mentorship in disguise. I clung to that illusion like it could keep me safe. Then one Friday evening, I stayed late to finish a quarterly presentation. Ethan was still there, or so I thought. His door was cracked open, light spilling into the hallway. I walked by quietly and heard him talking on the phone. "She's competent, sure," he was saying, laughing softly, "but she's too eager to please. Makes her predictable and easy to use. I'll keep her around until I can get someone better." My heart stopped. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. I wanted to believe it was about someone else. But when he said my name next, clear as glass, I knew. I backed away before he could see me. My chest felt tight, my pulse heavy in my ears. He had been using me. All of it. The long nights, the mentorship, the fake smiles had been a performance, a slow manipulation for his gain. I sat in my car that night, the parking lot empty around me, and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face looked calm, but my eyes didn't match. That was the first time I saw something new in them, not hurt, not confusion. Something sharper. A quiet suspicion. The kind that whispers, "He's playing a game." And somewhere deep down, a small voice whispered back, "Then learn the rules." I didn't know it yet, but that night was the beginning of something. Something he would never see coming. Because the mistake he laughed at was about to become his own. By Monday morning, the air at Falcon Dynamics felt different. Or maybe it was me. After what I'd overheard Friday night, I couldn't look at Ethan Shaw the same way. But he looked perfectly normal, sharp suit, confident grin, coffee in hand, as if he hadn't just gutted my trust with a single phone call. "Morning, Rachel," he said, flashing that perfect manager smile. "Big week ahead. You ready to crush it?" I forced a nod. "Always." He clapped my shoulder lightly, and the contact made my skin crawl. I hated that I still wanted his approval, even now. That somewhere, under the anger, I still craved the recognition I'd spent months earning. All day, I replayed his words in my head. Predictable. Easy to use. Each time, I told myself I must have misheard. That he meant something else. Anything else. Because the alternative, that he was playing me from the start, was unbearable. Still, things started to add up. The first red flag came that afternoon during a team meeting. We were reviewing client portfolios, and Ethan suddenly turned to Melissa, one of the newer analysts. "Melissa," he said smoothly, "why don't you take lead on the Vantage proposal? Rachel's been swamped, and you've got a sharp eye for detail." I froze. The Vantage proposal was mine. I'd been building it for weeks. Every chart, every data set, every projection, my work. Melissa blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, sure, if you want me to." Ethan smiled at her, that approving kind of smile he used to reserve for me. "I do. Let's see what you can bring to the table." I tried to speak, to remind him that the project was already near completion, but he didn't even glance my way. It wasn't just favoritism, it was a quiet dismissal, a subtle way to say you're not important anymore. After the meeting, I approached him privately. "Ethan, about the Vantage project," I thought. He didn't look up from his laptop. "Don't take it personally, Rachel. I just think Melissa's perspective could add something fresh." "Fresh? I've been building it for a month." He sighed dramatically, as if I were exhausting him. "You're too emotionally attached to your work. Learn to delegate." It was the kind of statement you can't argue with without sounding defensive. So I swallowed my pride, nodded, and left. But inside, something twisted. From then on, Ethan's behavior became a maze of contradictions. One day, he'd compliment my work in front of everyone. "Rachel really set the bar on this data model," and the next, he'd publicly undercut me. "Rachel, are you sure that's correct? We wouldn't want another email situation, would we?" Always with that smirk. Always just enough venom to sting, but not enough to call out. I started second-guessing everything I did. I checked my reports 3-4 times. I stayed later than ever, terrified of making another mistake. But the harder I worked, the colder he became. And then there were the lies, small at first, then sharper. He'd promised to forward my presentation to a client, but forget. He'd claim upper management rejected my idea, only for me to overhear later that he'd presented it himself, word for word. Every time, I wanted to confront him, to scream. But something in me, maybe fear, maybe confusion, held me back. Instead, I started journaling everything. Every project, every conversation, every manipulation. I didn't even know why at first. Maybe I just needed proof that I wasn't going crazy. Because that's what he made me feel, crazy. He had a way of twisting the truth until I doubted my own memory. Once, I mentioned the Vantage project again. "Ethan, remember when you reassigned it to Melissa?" He frowned, feigning confusion. "No, Rachel, you offered to let her take over. You said you were overwhelmed." My jaw dropped. "That's not true." He gave me a calm, almost pitying look. "Rachel, I think you've been too stressed lately. Take a breath. You're imagining things." It was terrifying, how calmly he said it, how sure he sounded. For a moment, I actually questioned myself. Had I really said that? Was I overreacting? That's the thing about manipulation, it doesn't scream. It whispers until you can't hear your own voice anymore. The office became a minefield. I avoided eye contact, avoided small talk. Even when coworkers laughed at his jokes, I caught subtle glances, pitying, curious, maybe even afraid. They saw what was happening. But no one said a word. That night, as I packed my bag, I caught my reflection in the glass wall of the conference room. My shoulders slumped, my eyes dull. I barely recognized myself. For the first time, I wondered if Ethan had been right about one thing. Maybe I was too eager to please. Maybe that's why he'd chosen me. Still, a flicker of something stirred beneath the exhaustion. Not rage, not yet. Just awareness. A quiet, growing certainty that something was deeply wrong. And this time, I wasn't going to ignore it. Because instincts don't lie, people do. I used to believe the worst kind of pain was being ignored. But I was wrong. The worst pain is realizing someone you trusted built their success on your broken back. 3 weeks after the Vantage incident, things at Falcon Dynamics had become unbearable. Ethan barely spoke to me except to correct, criticize, or subtly humiliate. My projects were reassigned, my input dismissed, my reputation quietly dismantled. Still, I stayed. I told myself I could rebuild, that good work would eventually speak louder than lies. Then came the executive presentation. Ethan had been prepping for it all week, an investor pitch that could secure the company's biggest deal of the year. He asked me to help with some data cleaning. That was all. Just a few hours of grunt work. But I'd been the architect of that entire data model. Months of my research, my algorithms, my projections, all buried under the assumption that I was just helping. Friday morning, I arrived early to review some last-minute details. I was passing by the conference room when I heard my name. Rachel did some of the groundwork, Ethan was saying smoothly, but the concept, execution, and final model, that's all mine. The room laughed approvingly. Investors nodded. I froze at the door. My pulse thundered in my ears. He was presenting my work, my designs, my formulas, with his name on every slide. The logo animation played, the charts came alive, the color scheme, even the transitions, were the ones I had chosen. It was like watching someone steal your soul in real time. I stood there in disbelief, my hands trembling, nails digging into my palm until I felt pain. He had stolen everything. And everyone in that room, executives, investors, directors, believed he was a genius. After the presentation, the applause was deafening. I couldn't breathe. I backed away before anyone noticed, clutching my notebook like a lifeline. In the hallway, my stomach twisted. I wanted to burst into that room and scream. To expose him. But what proof did I have? Every email, every draft, every shared file, all on the company server. And Ethan had control over the system. He'd planned this. Hours later, I sat at my desk, staring blankly at my computer screen, unable to process the betrayal. It wasn't just theft. It was humiliation. That night, as the office emptied, I saw Ethan through the glass partition, laughing with the CEO. Shaking hands. Clinking glasses of champagne. My throat burned. My eyes stung. He turned then and saw me. For a moment, our eyes locked. His expression didn't flicker. Just a faint, mocking smirk, the kind that said, "You wouldn't dare." And I didn't. Not that night. Instead, I walked out quietly, my whole body trembling. By the time I reached the parking lot, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I broke. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel as the tears came hard and fast. Every humiliation, every manipulation, every cruel smirk, it all hit me at once. I'd given that man everything. My time, my creativity, my loyalty. And he'd used me like a stepping stone. A voice in my head kept whispering, "You should have known." And maybe I should have. The red flags had been there all along, the stolen credit, the lies, the subtle gaslighting. But I wanted to believe in decency. I wanted to believe that hard work mattered more than office politics. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat at my kitchen table surrounded by notebooks and old emails, replaying every moment that now made sense. Every forgotten forward. Every accidental deletion. Every time he told me I was overreacting. He hadn't been careless, he'd been careful. The next morning, the company email hit my inbox like a bullet. Subject: Congratulations to Ethan Shaw, new Director of Operations. My heart sank. He'd done it. He'd used my work, my numbers, my ideas, and climbed the ladder I built. I clicked open the internal memo, scrolling numbly through the text until I reached the final paragraph. Ethan's innovative data architecture and visionary leadership secured our latest partnership deal. We look forward to his continued success. Visionary leadership. I laughed, a hollow, painful sound. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It was public. Institutionalized. Rewarded. By lunchtime, everyone was congratulating him. Flowers on his desk. Emails flooding in. I kept my head down, but inside, something changed. The tears were gone. So was the panic. All that remained was a deep, sharp calm like the moment before a storm breaks. I realized something then. Ethan had underestimated me. He saw me as naive, soft, desperate for approval. But he didn't know the version of me he had just created, the woman forged from humiliation and fury. He thought the story ended with his promotion. But it was only the beginning of mine. I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to make him regret every single moment he'd made me feel small. Quietly. Patiently. Precisely. Because the one thing Ethan Shaw never learned was that the people you laugh at on the way up are often the ones waiting for you on the way down. The Monday after Ethan's promotion, I sat at my desk like a ghost haunting my own life. Everyone moved around me laughing, congratulating, buzzing with the fake energy that fills an office after a big win. Only I knew the truth behind that victory. My victory, stolen, dressed up, and handed to him on a silver platter. For 2 days, I drifted through the motions. Emails. Meetings. Deadlines. My face smiled automatically, but my mind was somewhere else, replaying the betrayal over and over until it was carved into my bones. Then, on Wednesday morning, something inside me broke, but not in the way it had before. Ethan stopped by my cubicle, leaning casually against the partition like he owned the place. "Hey, Rachel," he said with that trademark smirk. "Don't forget to CC me on the report drafts. We want everything to look consistent with the new direction." His new direction. My old work. I looked up at him, really looked. The perfect tie, the confident stance, the glint of satisfaction in his eyes. He had no idea what he'd done. Or maybe worse, he knew and didn't care. And in that moment, my fear evaporated. Something colder, clearer, sharper took its place. I realized that no one was coming to save me. HR wouldn't care. The executives wouldn't listen. My coworkers would stay quiet. I was on my own. But for the first time in months, that thought didn't terrify me. It freed me. Because if no one else would fight for me, then I'd fight for myself. That afternoon, during my lunch break, I took my laptop to a small cafe down the street, one of those quiet spots with terrible coffee and even worse Wi-Fi. Perfect. I opened my cloud backup. Months ago, during a late-night project, I'd gotten into the habit of saving my drafts to a personal drive, not company property, just my own notes and prototypes. I didn't realize then how much those backups would matter. And there it was, everything. The data sheets. The design models. The original timestamps. The code logs. Even early voice memos where I talked through my process. All proof that I had created the system Ethan claimed as his own. My heart pounded. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not out of joy, out of purpose. I wasn't powerless. I had the truth. But I knew truth alone wouldn't be enough. People like Ethan thrived because they understood perception. He was charming, confident, management material. If I wanted justice, I needed more than proof. I needed a plan. That night, I sat in my apartment with nothing but my laptop and a notebook. I wrote one sentence across the top of the page. "You laughed at my mistake. Let's see how you handle yours." Below it, I started outlining everything I'd learned about Ethan's patterns, his ego, his shortcuts, his tendency to cover incompetence with charm. The way he took credit for others' work, exaggerated numbers, or manipulated performance reports. Piece by piece, I was turning pain into precision. Days turned into weeks, and my energy shifted. I wasn't shrinking anymore. I was watching, listening, gathering. Ethan thought I was broken, and that made me invisible. Perfect. While he paraded around with his new title, I began quietly documenting everything. Every misleading report. Every falsified projection. Every missing data source. And I saw it, the cracks forming beneath his glossy exterior. He was too busy basking in attention to notice the details slipping through. Numbers didn't quite match. Promises didn't align with results. Investors were starting to ask questions. One afternoon, I overheard a director mention that the Vantage partnership wasn't performing as expected. Ethan brushed it off with a laugh. Just a few kinks in implementation, he said confidently. But I knew better. His data model, my data model, was incomplete. Because the final component, the algorithm that made it all work, was never uploaded to the main system. I still had it. He'd stolen my work, but not the part that made it bulletproof. That night, I sat at my computer and stared at the code. I could fix it. I could hand it over, make everything work again. But why should I? He'd laughed at me, dismissed me, used me. Maybe it was time he learned what it felt like to lose everything. Still, revenge wasn't just about destruction. It was about control. And before I acted, I needed to be sure. So I waited, observed, strengthened. Each day, I felt more like myself again, not the timid employee desperate for approval, but the woman who had built something brilliant from nothing. Every insult he'd thrown, every condescending smile, it all became fuel. He'd taken my voice. Now I was taking it back. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to rise, not loudly, but deliberately. And when I was done, Ethan Shaw wouldn't just lose his title. He'd lose the one thing he prized most, his image. Because behind every powerful man who thinks he can laugh at a woman's mistake, there's often a woman quietly building the plan that will end his career. If revenge is a performance, then the rehearsal is everything. I had spent weeks gathering the props. The first rule I gave myself was simple: pretend to be the broken girl everyone wanted me to be. Let Ethan watch me wilt. Let him bask in the illusion of victory. He needed to keep underestimating me. That arrogance would be my advantage. So I smiled at his jokes in the break room, accepted impossible deadlines, and made a point of looking distracted in meetings. Melissa, who'd been handed the Vantage lead, even invited me to coffee one afternoon, part apology, part bonding. I accepted, listening as she vented about how terrified she was of failing. I let her talk, and I let her mention details, the exact phrase Ethan used when he praised her, how he'd insisted on a specific slide format, how he preferred color palettes that felt safe for investors. All the little casual confirmations that painted the picture I needed. Underneath my calm, I moved like a woman with a map. My laptop had been my lifeline. The backups I'd saved to an external drive were the raw materials. They contained every early draft with timestamps, audio notes I recorded to myself when I tested algorithms, and archived versions of charts with file names only I used. Metadata is boring until it's not, then it's irrefutable. I copied everything to encrypted folders, duplicated them onto a secure cloud I accessed from home, and labeled every file with dates and short, unemotional descriptions. Evidence without drama reads like truth. Next came the human pieces. Ethan's power existed because no one had a reason to doubt him. People loved his story, the charming manager who'd pulled the company together. To dismantle that, I needed to see doubt where it would grow fastest, with the people who held his reputation in their hands, the investors, the board members, and the clients. I started small. A carefully worded, casual coffee chat with Lydia from Investor Relations became an opportunity. I keep finding little inconsistencies in the Vantage reports, I said, as if I were only making conversation. Have you noticed discrepancies between projections and the source files? I watched her face as she glanced at her tablet, then down at Ethan when he walked by. Her eyebrows rose. That was the first tiny crack. I also cultivated allies I never imagined I'd need. The IT guy, Raj, was a quiet man who fixed jammed printers and knew more about the server than anyone realized. I'd complimented his work once, then asked him about backup protocols under the guise of curiosity. He explained permissions, logs, and who had access to what. When he mentioned that certain uploads required manager approval, a plan formed. I started bringing him coffee sometimes, paying a little more attention to his weekends and his kids' soccer matches. Little kindness can open doors. The trickiest piece was emotional. I could expose files and timestamps, but I also wanted Ethan to crumble from within, to show the world that his confidence was built on theft and lies. For that, I needed to make him talk. And people, especially arrogant ones, reveal themselves when they are comfortable. So I fed him comfort. When he sent a congratulatory email to the team, I replied with an effusive "Congrats, Ethan," and a gif. I laughed in the whole way at his crude jokes. I volunteered to help with his hero projects, the big client pitches where he liked center stage. He began leaning on me more, trusting me with small errands, forwarding drafts he thought were harmless. Each forwarded file was a breadcrumb. I also began planting social traps. During a cocktail hour networking event, I accidentally left my tablet unlocked with a visible folder open on the screen while standing close to Ethan and Melissa. The folder name was innocuous, Vantage Notes_Final, but anyone glancing would see a version history date that predated Ethan's final submission. 2 people did glance, a junior partner and a woman from legal. Both later mentioned it to colleagues in hushed tones. Gossip moves like a slow, steady tide. It doesn't announce itself, but it changes the shoreline. Another move was purely strategic, a polite private message to an early client of ours, phrased as an offer to review historical deliverables for continuity. Many older clients remembered the initial campaign, the graphics, the logo variation, the first pitch deck. Their emails became bridges to my past work. One of them replied with a PDF attachment labeled in a way only I would have labeled it. I felt my chest tighten when I opened it. The file name, the creator tag, my name. Proof is small things. Still, nothing would matter if Ethan suspected I was building a case. He had to think I was still on the ropes. He needed to believe he'd crushed me. So, when he asked me to proofread his new investor memo, I accepted. I sat at my desk, hands quiet and steady, and fixed typos he likely wouldn't have noticed anyway. We shared a laugh about my obsession with commas. He walked away lighter. Perfect. Every move was deliberate, and each felt heavy with the memory of humiliation. I thought of the conference room applause when he presented my model. I thought of the internal memo that called him visionary leadership. Each thought refueled me. There were nights I almost let fury take me, nights when I imagined confronting him, slamming printouts on his polished desk, and watching the room go silent. But fury is loud and often ruins strategy. I learned to swallow the roar and trade it for the sharp cold of planning. On a Wednesday when rain made the city look like an abstract painting, I sat in my small rented studio and compiled the first package, a clean folder with red flags and a short, clinical summary. It wasn't a threat, it was a dossier. I saved it as for board review, closed my laptop, and leaned back. For the first time since Ethan's smirk had crushed me, I felt something steadier than anger, a clear, focused calm. Somewhere across town, Ethan polished his shoes and rehearsed his next speech, still believing I was the cautionary tale he liked to tell new hires. He couldn't know that the woman he laughed at had been building the exact map that would lead to his undoing. I picked up my phone, thumb hovering over the send button. The little light in my chest pulsed once. Then again. When I finally hit send, it wouldn't be the end. It would be the first sound of the storm. I had imagined that moment 1,000 ways, furious, triumphant, sobbing, but the reality was quieter, almost surgical. That morning, I dressed in a simple navy suit, not to impress or to hide, but because clothes are the first polite armor you put on when you intend to face people who tried to erase you. The boardroom smelled of coffee and expensive wood. Bright light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, throwing long rectangles across the polished table. Investors sat like judges, phones face down. The CEO's face was polite but strained. Ethan arrived late, hands steady, smile locked in place as if confidence could be propped up like a set piece. I walked in with a single black binder under my arm, the exact thing I'd placed in a lawyer's briefcase weeks ago. It looked ordinary. The contents were not. The meeting began with the auditor, a calm woman with a voice that owned the room. She flipped the boardroom screen to the first slide, a timeline of files, timestamps glowing like coordinates on a map. The metadata spelled it out in numbers and dates, versions I had created, saved to my personal drive long before Ethan's final upload. The code comments were in my voice. The creator tags bore my initials. A hush folded over the room. Ethan's smile didn't reach his eyes. The auditor moved methodically, the way you walk through a crime scene. We traced the architecture of the Vantage model, she said. A significant portion of the core algorithms and initial design files were authored under Rachel Moore's accounts and devices. There were forwards and edits that indicate supervisory consolidation, taking distributed contributions and presenting them as a single authorship. Someone on the board coughed. Ethan's hand flexed around his pen. Then came Raj, the IT guy I'd been buying coffees for. He stood when called, looking like the unremarkable hero in an otherwise glossy drama. He walked them through server logs, permissions, and forwarded emails. He showed, in simple language and unflashy screenshots, the approvals Ethan had used, the files he'd accessed, and the versions he'd pulled into the investor deck. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The evidence did the work. But numbers and logs don't always move people. Emotion does. That's where Melissa's testimony landed like a blade. She took the stand, nervous, eyes honest, and described how Ethan reassigned her to the Vantage project with a directive to refresh the presentation. She described casual comments he made in private, the way he coached her to use certain phrasing and colors, the offhand lines about letting Rachel have the grunt work. Her voice trembled only once, and the room leaned forward. Ethan tried to speak. He tried the practice charm, the pivot to vision, the claim that he had integrated the team and synthesized ideas. But his words bounced against the clean architecture of dates and drafts. The investors didn't need florid speeches, they needed truth tied to results. The auditor closed her laptop and said, "There's a discrepancy between reported authorship and the documented authorship. We recommend a full, independent review and a temporary suspension from executive duties pending that review." It was precise, businesslike, surgical. Not a public circus, but worse in its own way, irrevocable, official, and humiliating. Ethan's face flushed the color of cheap marketing brochures. He hadn't expected this, not from me, not from anyone who'd believed the story he'd sold. By noon, the internal memo went out, Ethan Shaw suspended pending audit. The email was clinical, devoid of the applause that had once greeted him. It landed in inboxes with the soft weight of a verdict. Then the world outside the boardroom caught on. An internal leak, not from me, not directly, but from the legal counsel forwarding the audit summary to one of the major investors, made its way to a business reporter's desk. The narrative shifted from management shakeup to headlines about misattributed work, conflicts of interest, and investor distrust. Overnight, social feeds filled with the very clips Ethan had used to build his persona, him charming a room, him making bold claims, now juxtaposed with spreadsheets and scanned email headers that told a different story. Clients who had once praised Ethan's leadership began asking for audits. One long-standing partner quietly paused a multi-million-dollar rollout pending review. Liens were placed on certain discretionary transfers. The company's valuation took a slow, painful descent as confidence wavered. Throughout it all, I moved like someone watching a carefully staged play, present, composed, and oddly detached. People offered handshakes and whispered condolences. Colleagues I'd barely known before murmured, "I'm so sorry." The apologies felt small and animally human. They were relief to some and ammunition to others. When the company called an all-hands, there was a whisper of electricity in the air. People wanted to watch the fall. Some wanted justice. Others just wanted spectacle. I sat in the third row, binder left at my side, eyes forward. Ethan stood at the podium, his voice faltering at first. He tried to reclaim narrative with practice lines about misunderstanding, about shared credit, about looking forward. When a question about source files was asked by the head of legal, he shifted, then admitted to integrating teamwork. It sounded hollow in the open room. No one booed. There was no dramatic shouting. The fall was quieter. Directors removed him from lead assignments. The CEO announced the audit findings would be made available in summary form. Ethan's contacts thinned like wax in a flame. For a long stretch after, the company felt different, not ruined, but chastened. People walked with less swagger and more caution. Investors called for stricter attribution controls. HR introduced new policies on authorship and credit. It felt small and enormous at once. Later, as dusk painted the glass facades outside my window, I walked home through the city. Neon reflected in puddles. The world had not exploded, it had shifted. Ethan had been precise in his cruelty, but he had underestimated precision in return. I didn't dance on his ruin. I didn't gloat. I had no need to. The binder at my side had done its work. The truth had been patient and relentless. In my chest, something settled, not victory, but clarity. The storm had been delivered with calm intent. The rest, I knew, would be quiet aftermath, legal procedures, reputation recovery attempts, and months of slow, inevitable consequence. He had laughed at my mistake. Now everyone was finally listening to the work behind it. And in that listening was my answer. The storm ended not with thunder, but with silence, the kind that feels heavy and holy all at once. The air after rain. The breath after tears. Months had passed since that day in the boardroom, and life had found a slower rhythm. The world kept turning, headlines moved on, offices filled again with chatter, and Ethan Shaw's name became a cautionary whisper, not a legend. They said he was consulting somewhere abroad, trying to rebuild a reputation that once looked indestructible. But I had stopped tracking him. The revenge was done, not because I stopped caring, but because it no longer mattered. I'd moved into a smaller apartment by the river. Mornings began with coffee and soft sunlight instead of deadlines and dread. I spent hours writing again, not for approval, not for profit, but for myself. Code, essays, half-formed ideas. Things that didn't have to prove their worth to anyone. For the first time in years, my reflection didn't look like a stranger negotiating survival. It looked like someone returning home. There were still echoes, of course, moments when doubt crept in quietly, asking, did I go too far? Did I become what I hated? But then I'd remember the months of gaslighting, the quiet theft of my effort, the slow erosion of confidence disguised as teamwork. And I'd breathe through it. Justice isn't cruelty. It's balance restored. I met Melissa once more, by accident, in a downtown cafe. She smiled, awkward but genuine. You were right, she said. About everything. I told her I wasn't looking for right or wrong anymore. Just peace. She nodded, eyes wet. We didn't talk about Ethan. We didn't need to. People often think revenge ends when the villain falls. But the truth? The real victory begins when you stop needing their downfall to feel whole. My revenge had been necessary, but my healing, that was mine alone. One evening, I walked back to the building where it all began. The lights were on. The glass walls glowed gold against the night. New faces moved where old ones used to sit. A different team. Different energy. I stood outside for a long time, watching the reflections ripple across the glass. I didn't feel bitterness. Only distance, a clean, unbreakable distance between who I was then and who I had become. I remembered the first insult, useless, tossed so carelessly it had almost taken root in me. I remembered how I'd believed it for a while. How every late night, every compromise, every desperate attempt to please had grown from that seed of doubt. But standing there, I realized something. She called me useless, and I became unstoppable. Pain had been my teacher. Betrayal, my mirror. It showed me who was never on my side, and more importantly, who I could be when no one was there to save me. I didn't hate Ethan anymore. Hatred was too small, too consuming. What I felt was closer to gratitude, not for what he did, but for what I discovered in surviving him. I had built something out of the ruins. Strength that didn't need validation. A voice that didn't tremble. Boundaries sharp as glass. When I finally turned away from the building, the city breeze lifted my hair, cool and clean. Somewhere behind those windows, another meeting was beginning, another ambition brewing. The world moves fast, but truth, once spoken, stays. At home, I opened my notebook, the same one I used to sketch out revenge plans in, and wrote instead, she called me useless. He took my love for granted. But I turned every wound into wisdom, every scar into strategy. And when the dust settled, I didn't just survive, I rewrote the story. That night, I filmed one final message for my audience, my story complete. Sometimes, I said into the camera, voice calm and steady, the people who break you are really handing you the tools to rebuild yourself stronger. Not prettier. Not softer. Stronger. And when you finally rise, they'll call it revenge, but really, it's reclamation. I paused, eyes meeting the lens. Have you ever faced betrayal like that? When someone stole your light and thought you'd never shine again, Tell me your story in the comments. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to know they're not alone. A faint smile curved my lips. And if you've ever been broken, remember this. The world doesn't decide your worth. You do. The recording light blinked off. The room went quiet again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was peaceful. Outside, the city lights shimmered across the river, reflections of 1,000 untold stories, all beginning again. He stole my spotlight, but I became the sun.